Hey everyone, I can see a few people there dialing into us. Huge welcome to the very special broadcast today. While we do wait for a few more people to join, I just want to make sure that our chat function is working on the viewer side. If people could just please write in the chat where you are joining us from today, that'd be great. If it's obviously one of the major cities, regional area, or international. Oh, perfect. I can see a lot of the East Coast here. Canberra, Sydney, Melbourne, Allensfort. Oh, we have Perth as well. Thanks for joining us so early in the morning. Port Macquarie, Darwin, Newcastle. Geez, we have a lot here. Thanks for that, guys. So to introduce myself, my name is Dean Devereaux. I'm a training consultant here at Informa Connect. I'm pleased to have Dr. Graham Edkins with us today. He's going to chat about psychosocial hazard, incident investigation, integration, or separation. Before we go any further, I want to let you know this broadcast will go for about 30 minutes. Dr. Edkins, he will be sharing some beneficial information and project thinking. After that, both Dr. Edkins and myself will be happy to stay on the line and answer any questions you have specific to your challenges. Feel free to use the chat function for this as well throughout for any questions. Welcome, Dr. Graham. Would you mind just starting, obviously, just give us some information and background on yourself and obviously what prompted you to develop this webinar topic?
All right, yeah, welcome everybody, and thank you, Dean, for the introduction. Let me just bring up some slides here so we can commence our webinar, and thank you everybody for joining in from wherever you might be. So I notice there's lots of different types of locations here, which is fantastic to see. Let me just bring up the slides, and I'll do a bit of an introduction as to my background as well. All right, you should see something coming up on the screen momentarily, coming up now. Just Dean, just confirming that you can see the title slide on the screen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so welcome everybody, and thank you, Dean. So my name's Graham Edkins. I've been working in health safety, risk management, human factors for about 30 years. I'm trained in organisational psychology, so I have a master's degree and a PhD in that area, and have essentially been involved in significant investigations for many years in different industries. Also expert witness testimony for commissions of inquiry, coronial matters, and indeed sometimes civil injury type claims. I also run a fair bit of training around things like investigation techniques. So many of you might be familiar with the ICAM method, but I also run other programs in particular in the aviation sector. And I have a background where I've come from roles within the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, Qantas, Public Transport Safety Victoria, and indeed CASA. These days, I run my own business, Leading Edge Safety Systems, and work with lots of clients in investigations and increasingly psychosocial hazard type issues as well, which is what prompted me to begin this or do this webinar. Is that there is some guidance at the moment on or for organisations in how to manage psychosocial hazards from a risk management perspective, but very little guidance around how to investigate an incident when one might arise in this area. So it's prompted me to have this webinar particularly focused on this topic. Back to you, Dean.
Perfect. I know, look, obviously myself, I was Googling on Friday, what psychosocial hazards is. So I suppose if Graham, are you able to just clarify obviously what it is and why there's so much interest in it, currently in this day and age?
Sure. There's certainly a lot of interest in the topic at the moment. So let's just start with what they are. So essentially psychosocial hazards are any workplace related factors that can adversely impact employees' health and overall well-being. So when we use the term health and well-being, we're meaning physical and mental. And some of these factors can arise from, inadequate organizational design, the social conditions of the workplace that we're in, governance, and just simply the working environment. You can see there on the right-hand side that this is some examples of psychosocial hazards that might arise at work, and this comes from the Safe Work Australia guideline. Things like job demands, low job control. There's a whole range of these issues. But I might make a note that these aren't necessarily new things. They've always been there. And it's been a requirement to look at them and examine them and manage them from the original, occupation health and safety regulations that came out of the 1950s. There was a requirement to include psychological health and safety since that time. It's just that more recently, governments, regulators, standards bodies have put out guidance and requirements to manage psychosocial hazards, and that's in the last few years. Myself, when I was investigating aircraft accidents back in the early to mid-90s, when I joined the Bureau of Air Safety Investigation, we would often look at psychosocial issues. If we're looking at an aircraft accident, we'll look at the role of workplace conflict potentially with the pilots and the cockpit crew, and what was going on in their life in terms of workplace life stresses. So this, again, this stuff is not new. And indeed, it is a pressing issue. If we look at the data from Safe Work Australia, a recent study, we know that mental health claims are indeed on the rise. We can see here from this data that they account for about 7% of workers' compensation claims. But interestingly enough, it's the cost of them that tends to be more costly than, say, other workers' compensation claims like physical issues. So on average, we see more time off work for people putting in a mental health condition claim than for other claims. And I might ask people to think about what they think are the most common psychosocial claims that might account for this rise in data, because there are lots of different types of issues out there. But the ones that the data suggests are more common are things like bullying and harassment, job demands, and traumatic events. And it's interesting that bullying and harassment comes out as the number one issue. And to do the definition of what bullying is, remember it's something that is a repetitive, habitual behaviour, not necessarily a one-off thing. So there are sometimes some complex issues when we look at some of these psychosocial hazards in terms of their etiology, their origin, and their impact on people. Which is really the point I wanted to make with psychosocial hazards in this webinar, is that unlike physical hazards that we see, they're often quite visible, quite tangible. So when people get exposed to a biological hazard, like pathogens or something like COVID, we can generally identify how long they've had it, what sort of treatment we need to engage in, and what generally the course of that treatment, what impact it's going to have on that person's physical health at least. We can do the same with chemical exposure, chemical hazards. But when it comes to psychosocial, it's a bit more difficult. Often the issues are very interconnected, and then there can be a long gestation period. What does that actually mean? Well, if somebody experiences extreme stress as part of the work that they do, this may not necessarily manifest itself straight away from a psychological distress issue. Also, if somebody engages in remote or isolated work, on the normal day-to-day work, if they do that regularly, that might not be a problem for them. But then put in there a different kind of psychosocial hazard, such as customer-facing violence and aggression, then this might manifest itself in a problem. Somebody that goes through a traumatic event may then result in not eating well, perhaps addictive behaviour such as drugs and alcohol, can then cause further workplace conflict from people being a bit angry or short with people and when they're normally not. So you can see straight away that the psychosocial hazards that we have they're not linear is the point I'm going to make. They're very interconnected. And this can present some real challenges for organisations in managing these. So can I ask people to think perhaps about some implications of what some ineffective psychosocial hazard management issues might be? And I might ask Dean to see what's sort of coming through on the chat is what might happen if a business doesn't manage psychosocial hazards effectively. So maybe, Dean, if you have a look at the chat, is what's coming through? What are some of the issues there that people are identifying?
I suppose one here I see sick leave increases, low performance, absence from work, and increased premium. Seems increased
Absolutely.
sick leave seems to be one that's come up there, yeah.
Yeah,
A lot.
absenteeism, yeah. Yeah, look, there's lots of impacts, and certainly absenteeism, sick leave is up there. But just things like anxiety, potential depression, if these things aren't managed, this has an impact potentially on the organisation from a productivity perspective. We sometimes see poor worker engagement, negative impact potentially on business brand and reputation. And if our organisation then gets a reputation for not managing these issues, not looking at these issues in a comprehensive way, that can cause some later impacts around staff attraction and retention issues. So you can see that, you know, psychosocial hazard management is very important. It's something that is about having good leadership and management commitment too, so that we take care of our number one asset in our business, which is people, as we well know. Let's have a look at then who's responsible for psychosocial risk management. And if I've drawn this diagram here that indicates there are various parties that might have some, if you like, some influence, some role in regard to psychosocial risk management. So we'll have a look at the investigation in a moment. Let's just focus on proactively managing this concept of psychosocial hazards. So HR, industrial relations certainly have a role in ensuring that they collaborate, particularly with work health and safety, to share information around psychosocial risks, to ensure there's education, training, awareness around those things. Operations certainly have a role because that's where a lot of the people in an organisation tend to sit. Have we ensured that we've carried out risk assessments around psychosocial hazards in consultation with our workforce? So we've got good, intelligence and data on this. Risk in an organisation can mean a lot of things. We're talking about enterprise risk management, but psychosocial hazards are just one risk. So have we prioritised which ones we think are important in our business? So some businesses very much are customer focused, are focused on dealing with members of the public, and where others are more working in ring-fenced environments where members of the public don't enter. So things like violence and aggression, for example, which is one psychosocial hazard, may indeed come from customers. So some organisations need to prioritise which particular psychosocial hazards they perhaps need to pay more attention to. Work health and safety obviously have responsibility around the measurement, monitoring of the controls around psychosocial hazards, and legal and risk obviously have additional responsibilities around making sure that our duty holders, our board, our senior management understand what their responsibilities are and that we've reported these issues to the appropriate authorities. So you can see there that when we look at psychosocial risk management, there is very much a shared responsibility. There's overlap, particularly in all these areas. Where it becomes more complex is where there's psychosocial hazard investigation. So we have an incident, we now need to investigate what's happened. Who then becomes responsible for that? This is, a real dilemma and a real current challenge within organisations. So in a moment, I'm going to ask people, and we're going to have a look at a poll, which Imran's going to bring up for us to vote on the following case study. So let's have a look at the case study, and then we're going to ask participants in our webinar here, who do they think would be responsible for this investigation? So here's scenario one. Call center worker essentially is employed in a remote location. They report excessive job demands, low job control. This is allegedly the result of her employer requiring frequent overtime and after hours work on top of her normal daily work hours. This impacts her role as a primary caregiver for her disabled daughter. So the call center worker claims that despite several verbal and email communications notifying her manager of these concerns and adverse impact on her health, no demonstrable action has been taken. The worker alleges poor support from management, who are dismissive of her concerns, stating that there's really no backup alternate resources that they can use. The manager allegedly informs the worker that she's not happy, she should go and look for alternative employment. Right, so the question that we're going to ask in the poll is which party in the organisation is responsible for that incident investigation?
So there's a lot here saying HR, and then
Yeah.
work health and safety would be second there, and then operations. I know myself, if I was able to go into this, well, I would probably say HR as well, but you can let me know if I'm right or wrong there, Graham.
Well, this is the point. Right and wrong is a subjective thing, I suppose, but certainly because there's been no, I'm going to call it a traditional work health and safety incident, then it's probably most likely going to be HR or possibly industrial relations, depending on the makeup of your organisation. This is because the issue is alleged. There's alleged stresses, there's alleged poor support, so this needs to be investigated. Whereas the call center worker would be asked to provide some more information. The manager, on the other hand, would be also asked to respond to that alleged issues from the worker. And we might even, indeed, HR might even look at other people that perhaps do that role just from a comparison perspective. This doesn't mean that work health and safety don't have an involvement. One of the things that we might be looking at is other issues around people working in remote areas. That does say that the person who works in a fairly remote area, remote location, has there been previous incidents identified in that area? And possibly from an operations perspective, they might certainly have a part to play in this, in terms of the makeup of that job and other opportunities for that worker to work elsewhere, for example. So on the surface, certainly HR would take the lead on an investigation like this, given that it is alleged psychological distress, psychological impact that needs to be explored with the appropriate confidentiality, I might add too. Let's change it and make it something different. So now we've got the same worker, but we're going to change the scenario. So it's the same worker now who is required to travel to a satellite office to attend training, and en route loses direction and control of a motor vehicle. Vehicle rolls over, the worker sustains injuries requiring medical attention and time off work. So, same question, which party now in the organisation is responsible for the incident investigation? So let's end the poll. We're going to do now poll 2. This should be coming up on your screen. Who now would take the lead on this investigation? I suppose there's probably a more specific question, yeah. Well, the poll looks pretty clear. What do you think, Dean?
One sec there now. I'm having, sorry, I had poll 2 up here. Yeah, work health and safety, it looks like majority of people are saying.
Yeah.
Not
So
sure
you can
myself.
see that the answer, yeah, let's probably end the poll. I think that's 88% is what's coming out very much from the participants. That's a pretty clear result. Thank you very much for that. We'll just close that poll down. So yeah, you can see that the answer to the question, who's responsible for investigations in this area, it depends. It depends upon what kind of incident it is. It doesn't mean that as part of our work health and safety investigation of this matter, we may refer, in fact, issues to HR that are discovered as part of that investigation around alleged workplace conflict between the worker and the manager, etc. But ultimately, the responsibility is to investigate that incident. We would discover psychosocial hazards as part of that potentially, and then that may need to be referred to HR. The point is that we need to ensure that we have an integrated approach for doing that. So what I mean by that is if we take the view around do we integrate, do we separate, which is really the title of this webinar, I think that psychosocial risks are like any risk type. We need to have the same approach for managing risk. We've got to set our appetite, we've got to design our controls, we've got to monitor their effectiveness. For any kind of investigation that we do, whether it's psychosocial or not, we've got to know the same things. What happened, why it happened, what do you need to do about it, and what did we learn? So we can take an integrated approach to that. And really, to me, the key issue in any investigation in this area is what I would call the rule of three. What did people do or not do? What were their clear actions or inactions in accordance with our expectations in our organisation? What factors, particularly what we call performance shaping factors, influenced those actions and actions performed? And that really is what we call human factors and psychosocial hazards in there. And very importantly, how effective were the risk controls? That's what we need to look at, is those three things. And if we can have a consistent framework around how we do that, we can integrate our approach to investigations. So let's have a quick look at a case study and how we might do that. This incident is based upon a video I made some years ago when I was doing some consulting work for the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And we looked at trying to educate the industry on best practice human factors. So this incident involves a Fairchild Metro 3 aircraft that departs Sydney on a group charter flight bound for Mildura. And they're transporting a football team to Mildura from Sydney. At about 9:30 at night, tracking 50 nautical miles west of Mildura, the aircraft experiences severe turbulence, thunderstorm and driving rain. The captain requests an updated weather forecast and is provided with what's called a SIGMET, which is a significant change to meteorological conditions that have been issued 2 hours earlier. Essentially, the crew then have to divert the aircraft. They can't land in Mildura, and they divert to a place called Renmark. Let's have a look at what's happened. And as you'll see as you watch the video, this is a safety incident, absolutely, but there are significant workplace conflict and other issues involved as we watch.
What have you got?
Splitting headache and a cold. Hey, where are the pills?
Top cupboard.
The strong ones?
Top cupboard. Got them?
Yep.
You okay?
Yeah, I'll survive.
Some of us have it easy. There's the weather and no Thames. Try something different today. Read them. And another thing, you owe me, so today you can fly both sectors. Look at it as a learning experience.
Thanks.
Oh, boy, slow down. That's not. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Oh, we're walking pretty quick here.
Mind your head there, guys. Watch the prop. Careful of the steps and mind your head on the way up.
Nice flight, boys.
Okay.
Here we go.
What's segment and amended TAF?
I didn't hear any segment.
Zulu Tango Quebec, can we please have the amended TAF?
Zulu Tango Quebec, amended TAF, Mildura area. Valid from 10 to 18. Changes as follows. Severe thunderstorms with hail. Visibility reduced to 500 metres in rain. Overcast and 500 feet.
You bloody idiot, you're going to get us killed!
What do you want to do?
First, we'd better come up with an alternate. Get the charts out.
All right, so we can see from that video that there is an incident that occurred, but there are significant issues around crew conflict. So when we look at an investigation or incident like this, the incident obviously needs to be reported as soon as practical. Any first aid or wellbeing assessment needs to be conducted as part of our incident response. We need to, at that point, look to see whether any psychosocial hazards are evident initially, and if so, ensure that appropriate psychological support is provided. Then we record the incident, we report it, of course, to authorities as required, and then we look to see where it sits on our risk radar. So for all high-risk incidents, severity level type risks, where there's no psychosocial hazards initially evident, we would conduct our investigation as normal. However, we may identify that there are psychosocial hazards as part of that investigation. This should be referred to HR where required. If we have an incident, it's not an actual traditional work health and safety incident, I'll use that term loosely, but there are psychosocial hazards involved, the one that we mentioned earlier about the call centre worker might qualify, then HR really are the responsible parties to lead that investigation. So you can see here that this helps us to work out where responsibilities lie. So work health and safety leads investigation for all significant level work health and safety events, HR to be notified where required if psychosocial hazards are evident. But to be honest, the focus on all investigations should be about improving risk controls. What have we got in our organisation to manage these issues? Of course, where there is alleged criminal conduct, so one of the psychosocial hazards indeed is sexual harassment, then this should be referred to authorities. And in this case study, we can have a look at then what people did or not do, what were their actions and inactions. And I'm sure you saw from the video, there was lots of issues from the captain's perspective, from the first officer. The first officer didn't declare that he was actually not fit for duty. He was significantly fatigued, had a migraine and some cold and flu, but really the captain really didn't establish a working climate for that first officer to be confident about reporting that fatigue state as well. And what we can do is make sure that we use a cognitive error taxonomy to capture that information, where we look at who did it, what was the task, what were the actions or inactions. We use a cognitive error taxonomy to code that, what was the result, and then what's the evidence. So it's important that we do refer back to the evidence to identify what the action or inaction was. So that's the first rule of three. And we use a cognitive error taxonomy to do that using neutral language. So I don't particularly like the terms errors and violations. I think actions, inactions is a more neutral, softer term. When it comes to the second part of the rule of three, we look at what performance shaping factors influence the actions, inactions of those people. So can I just ask Dean, let's ask our participants just a bit of a final quick question. What are some performance shaping factors based upon what our webinar participants might think? What can you see in that chat function there? You there, Dean?
Yeah. Sorry, there's nothing coming through there at the moment. Oh, here we go. See, operation situational awareness.
Yep,
the
for sure.
leadership support, lack of support, fatigue, caregiver stress at home, obviously low control with DFO.
Yep.
There's a few more here, similar stuff, fatigue, lack of trust.
Yep. Fantastic. Yeah, so this is what we prepared earlier. You can see here there's lots of human factors, confidence level, poor communication, personal issues, but also lots of psychosocial as well, job demands, inadequate support, of course. Bullying, I mean, in this particular case, what we didn't show you would have been a previous incident where there had been sustained aggressive behaviour by the captain on a previous incident. So it was a pattern of this, and certainly some conflict, poor workplace relationships as well. So what we can do is use a classification system or a coding system to classify those performance shaping factors, which we divide into really people factors, environment, equipment and procedures. And we also include the very important psychosocial in there. You can see that there's a number of those in this case study, and also some organizational issues around low operator status. So it's important to use a consistent coding process to capture these issues so that we can have consistency in our investigation. And then the final rule of 3 is how effective were the risk controls. So we looked at what people did or did not do, what were the reasons, that's the performance shaping factors, and very importantly, how effective were those controls. So in this case, you know, some potential issues around health and wellbeing programs. Arguably, the first officer should have been given those support programs early on as part of not managing, having some issues at home from a caregiver perspective. Drug and alcohol management, what's the focus of our use of non-prescription medication? We talk a lot about illicit drugs in our drug and alcohol programs, but what about non-prescription, over-the-counter medication? Fatigue countermeasures, the allowable process of cockpit napping. In this case, you saw the captain have a bit of a nap there, and other issues around crew briefing and the reporting of that incident as well. And then what we do there is we just use a coding system again to capture those risk controls. Most of those should be prevention, and we identify why were they ineffective and what's their evidence. There's some other ones here as well that we can look at, fitness for work particularly, health and wellbeing management program, very important to capture here in this one. And then our recovery risk controls as well. So in this particular case, the captain delegated the reporting of that incident to the first officer. So that would be something we need to look at as a post incident issue. All right, so again, using a coding process is really important for when we capture these issues. All right, so conclusions, final. When we do investigations in this area, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We should be really integrating our incident investigation approaches and incorporate psychosocial hazards in there. But we need to be absolutely clear where the investigation responsibility lies amongst those other parties. We need to ensure that our language, whether it's work health and safety, whether it's HR, that grievances and disputes that are alleged to occur are really just hazards to manage. So we should try to use neutral and positive language where we can. Incorporate your psychosocial hazards into your risk registers. That's pretty important. Try to normalise the reporting of them. They should be seen like any other hazard, but obviously treated with the appropriate comprehensiveness. And we need to try to avoid a fatalistic lens. You know, remember, confidentiality, privacy is important in this area, but after all, we're trying to improve the workplace approach to risk management after all as well. Right, so I might stop there. Back to you, Dean, for, I know we're a little bit over time, but perhaps any quick questions.
Yeah, we might take a few questions there. If anyone has any questions in the chat, please do so. Or I might start off there actually, Graham. Like obviously, with your experience with incident investigation, like what is the biggest challenge for psychosocial hazards?
I think the biggest challenge is that they're not neatly labelled, is that one psychosocial hazard might have an impact on other things. So if you are working in remote or isolated areas, what do we consider remote or isolated? That's one of the psychosocial hazards. So if you're driving 2.5 hours into a remote area, maybe that qualifies. If you're then driving 2.5 hours between 2 regional centres, is that really remote or isolated? But you're on your own. So it's a real challenge in putting boundaries around some of these areas, which are very broad and very generic. And, you know, that they are hazards. Hazards in that physical space are much easier to identify. The psychosocial ones are quite challenging. So I think that's one of the challenging issues. The other one, of course, is that in an issue like remote working or isolated jobs, is that there's different parties within the organisation have a responsibility for managing that risk. It's not just work health and safety. So this makes it a real challenge.
Nice. We have someone here just asking about psychosocial risk versus socio-technical.
Okay, yeah, psychosocial risks are defined through guidance at the moment, through regulations, at least here in Australia. So there's lots of data on this. Socio-technical is referring to how we manage health, safety, performance within a system. So socio-technical is a system approach where we're looking at how we manage not just psychosocial issues, but how we manage efficiency and productivity as well. So it's not just about safety and about well-being, it's also about productivity and efficiency. So we take a socio-technical approach to understand that there are different facets that we need to look at.
Okay, nice. There's a few questions here. Look, I'm just going to choose one. So here from Richard Petty, where is the claimed hazard is if the employee is subject to client complaints or performance management? Is that a psychosocial hazard where all due process is applied properly?
It potentially may be, but again, this is where an investigation, we need to determine the veracity of that issue. So this is where both sides of the complainee, the complaineur, would need to be spoken with, investigated. We need to have a look at our policies, our procedures around this. We need to have a look at the history of, has this happened before? What have we done about it? So yeah, some of the issues around alleged violence, which may be verbal abuse, it might not be physical in this case, it needs to be investigated and needs to be investigated comprehensively. If it involves customers though, potentially that matter should also be referred to authorities. So while there's a work health and safety risk management requirement to manage your own workers to ensure that they do get the help that they need, if they are feeling traumatized, impacted by that encounter, there's also a requirement for us to notify authorities, particularly if it's a customer issue as well.
Nice. Do you have time for one more question, Graham?
I absolutely do, Dean. Far away.
Yeah. So here's one. A lot of psychosocial hazards are unseen. Are you able to provide any insights on best ways to bring awareness to these in organizations and its people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. They are unseen. And one of the issues with psychosocial hazards is that if there is an alleged issue, it might not manifest in psychological distress for many weeks or many months. You don't necessarily see a linear relationship between the two. This is where I think organizations need to focus on being proactive around identifying those risks, giving people education, awareness, training around that. The particular role of leaders here in ensuring that they have open conversations with their staff around that, because there's some of these issues have issues around confidentiality. People are embarrassed about some of those issues as well, and this really is an inhibitor to making them transparent in the open. So it's inherent on the organisation to ensure that there are many opportunities to ensure that these invisible issues, I kind of agree with the question, become more illuminated.
Thanks for that, Graham. Look, I think we'll leave it at that. I know we've gone over time a bit here. Graham, I'd just like to thank you, obviously, just for taking the time to walk us through this, obviously, the psychosocial hazards within incident investigations. I know it's been very insightful. Definitely a lot can be taken away and used in different industries from this session. To the attendees, I appreciate your contribution to the webinar, which are questions. Obviously a lot taken away from this. Graham, are you able to just go to you have the next one up there. Perfect. So look, guys, we do obviously do some training courses with Graham. These will be taking place next year. Obviously, if you want to, have the next steps in the knowledge of incident investigation, then feel free to come along to these. We do have human factor analysis for incident investigation. So this is a 2-day course we do within Australia, obviously going through the human and performance shaping factors that contribute to incidents. This is a focus on psychosocial hazards. We also have the online sessions there, which are human factor and error management. There's either fundamentals or fundamentals and advanced, goes through safety critical industries or specific to railway. So this is a kind of comprehensive foundation in human factors, including mental health. Obviously goes through cultural influences and error management strategies to improve safety outcomes within an organization. So that's it from my side. I know we'll be offering a 10% discount for those who attended today. And I know there was a few questions there regarding the webinar. This has been recorded, will be available after, and also the slides will be available as well. Right. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Graham, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
All the best.